Well, like, you know.
Yeah. All right, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Roasting Marshmallows. My name is Rolsuut and I am your host. So ever since the dawn of humanity, people had to work together and form teams in order to achieve a common goal. These goals could be something as vital as survival, but also as civilizations were growing, to build great structures such as the pyramids, and maybe even in modern times building awesome apps for your smartphone. The times change though, and with changing times can also come changing teams. And one would expect with all these years of teamwork that, we as humans have done, we would have been gotten very good at adapting to these team changes. But it turns out this is often not the case. But luckily for us, we are roasting marshmallows with Heidi Helfand, a software engineering leader with over 20 years of experience helping fast-growing companies double and even triple in size. She even wrote a book on this topic, Dynamic Reteaming, which details people-focused patterns and tactics to help companies thrive through hypergrowth. She has helped launch Procore Technologies and AppFolio to IPO and Expert City to acquisition by Citrix. And she was one of the original development team that built the GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar platforms. She's currently VP of Engineering Growth at Kin Insurance, which offers affordable coverage to homeowners in catastrophe-prone regions. And she coaches software development teams using practical, people-focused techniques with the goal of building resilient organizations as they experience rapid growth. Calling in from Southern California, welcome, Heidi.
Hello, thank you.
Hey.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so did I pronounce your last name correct?
Well, almost.
Helfand, yeah. And I'm smiling because I love, from pyramids to apps.
Yeah, man. It's the same challenge. Although I think less people have died building apps than pyramids, probably.
I don't know. It's not good for the health, man. The stress, getting it out there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm also joined today by Arno and Panche. Welcome, guys. Glad to have you part of the team.
Thanks.
And I guess the composition of this podcast could also be considered dynamic reteaming, right? Because every week it's a different set of people recording this podcast. Would that be a fair assessment?
There you go. Yes, it would.
Yeah. So Heidi, first,
which strategies do we apply?
The one-by-one pattern of reteaming. Sorry, it's the one-by-one pattern of reteaming.
Yeah. So maybe before we can start about these patterns, maybe first, why do we need a book about this reteaming? Because, like I said, we've been doing it for years and years and years as humans. Companies have been doing it for years and years and years, probably as well, with changing teams around and stuff. Why the need for a book?
Yeah, why the need for a book? In my experience in teams and companies, one thing that I've learned is that change is inevitable. How can we lean into it and get better at it? Because it's also very challenging. It can be really hard, especially if you catalyze team change. It could also be hard when it just kind of surprises you and happens. So there's tactics about getting better at it.
Yeah.
That's why.
Because you've seen some negative results maybe about like teams changing around, like growing really fast or maybe splitting up, and you felt like, okay, there's a better way to cope with this.
I think it's more about it's really challenging, especially when you have reteaming situations with a lot of people. It's easy for intent and the why about the reteaming to get lost. It's very hard to align large groups of people towards changes. But really, I wrote the book initially to prove a point that and share stories from colleagues all around the world who have been in teams that have changed for a variety of reasons, and they've been very successful at it.
Okay.
So it's a lot of the books you might read, there's a few of them behind me, a lot of the traditional wisdom about teams, forming, storming, norming, performing, might say, well, the goal is to try to keep your teams the same, try to keep more of a stable situation. And what I've found is that, especially if your company is growing like crazy, it could be counterproductive to use that particular lens.
Yeah.
That I found it's more useful to focus on the change aspect and how can we do that? How can we get better at it? And what does it look like? So I was trying to prove a point to
Okay.
share the stories of change, to just show and demonstrate that it is a thing.
Yeah.
And let's look here and kind of shift the conversation in that direction.
And what is your perspective on companies that not grow that fast? Have you been in? Because in my experience, teams always change, even if the company seems to be stable at itself. You know, people leave, people join. So for me, my perspective is it goes both ways for any company.
Yeah. You can see it's not just the fast-growing companies. Maybe it feels more pronounced because the differences could be seen as bigger when you're at, you know, so I was in a company once and we had 20 people start in one day. That's a tremendous shift to a system. Doesn't happen every day for many companies to incur that much change in a day. But yeah, I mean, if you're at a company that maybe you're not in a high growth phase, but you are going to start working on a new product, maybe some changes result because of that. So more of like a work-driven reteaming. You could have people changing teams because they really want to learn something new and work with different people. So that catalyzes a change. So there's 5 patterns of reteaming. They show up regardless of whether you're fast growth, slow growth, larger company, smaller company. There are these base patterns.
Yeah, so when I was reading the book, and first of all, your idea of change is inevitable, so let's get good at it, was like really a fresh perspective, fresh wind when it comes to teams. Because the standard is, the team needs to stay, the longer it is, the longer they know each other. And this was like, oh, wow, this is actually quite interesting. So the more we practice it, the more we get better, the more we know how to do it. And I couldn't but draw the parallel with putting code into production. So it's like we dread like working in long cycles, and like we dread this going into production thing. So we want to like really make it sure it goes smooth. But if you actually do it more often, then it's not that big of a deal. And so every change on the code that you put in production, it's like, it's momentarily there. Could you draw that analogy as well? It's like inevitable that things are going to change. So let's just not make a big deal out of it.
I think like many things, the more you do it, maybe you feel like you get better at it and you learn and try to apply your learnings towards the future. There's a chapter in the book specifically devoted to like feedback loops and retrospectives. I think as you do it at a company, you're in a specific system with the people who are there at the time. If you do it 2 years later at that company, maybe the players have changed, so it feels like you're doing it again, but maybe you can apply some of the same contextual aids to make it easier in that context. You switch companies, we take with us these learnings from other places, but then we get into a new context. Some of it applies, some of it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's different people. So we have to kind of build communities of learning together that reflect on catalyzing change, reflecting on how it went. And just, really, it's like trying to do the best that we can together, and learning together is key.
Yeah.
This stuff is hard. With best intentions, we can, always encounter challenges. Everything is problem trading or challenge trading. We have a challenge today. We try to address the challenge. We have new challenges. And so I guess, at the end of the day, we want to focus on relationship building, working together, learning together, and doing the best that we can.
And is this something you could, did you notice this from the past as well? Or is this some movement because I read in your book, you were doing waterfall for at least 8 years, I think. And then you figured out the agile movement. And is this something that came parallel to that? Or was it something you noticed before as well? Because to me, the agile movement is about individuals over processes, etc., which, and I hear you speak about the human factor of reteaming. To me, that correlates a lot.
Yeah, the human factor. I think the first startup I was at was in the waterfall days. I was there for, I think I was there until 2007. And then I was in the second startup where we started deliberately with extreme programming, some Scrum. And then from there, so from 2007 on, kind of started my agile education and
indoctrination.
background. Pivotal, what is that?
Agile indoctrination.
Whatever it is, whatever it became, different ways of working than we experienced at the first startup. I think, though, regardless of whichever approaches to building software, I mean,
things change, right? Anyway.
But things change, flavor of the day, but putting people first is something that I've always tried to do.
So then, I mean, even for us, like you mentioned an example earlier that you had one day when 20 people joined, and that's like a huge impact on culture and like on continuity of a culture. And then obviously new joinees have an impact of culture. And how important is to preserve culture, or shouldn't, because culture evolves as people join, I suppose. So how important is to actually preserve a culture? And and maybe a second part of the question then. I liked in your book that you talk about the role of a good story to unite a team or unite a company. So like, just if you can elaborate a bit on those two things, on the culture and the stories to promote a culture, maybe.
Okay, I'm going to talk first about the culture and then remind me about the stories if I forget.
Yeah.
It's really like culture building together and culture addition, and new people come onto the scene and work with the people who are already there, and we bring our differences, we bring ourselves together, and this is not, culture in my view is not a static thing. We are growing and building this community of people together. Now, there are specific concerns sometimes and I've been in this situation twice, the first team. You're at a startup, you things are going a certain way, you double in size, feels quite different. You triple in size, feels quite different. And people will always, and they usually use the word in English here, maintain. How do we maintain our culture? And, what I've learned from reflecting on not only my initial feelings of nostalgia at the second startup in particular about how it changed, and what about how this is how we do things, right? Well, no, like we are growing and changing together. And sometimes when I would give talks about reteaming, and I'd have a picture of an ice cream cone melting, because nothing stays the same. We need to enjoy every day that we have. Because, it's awesome to get this ice cream cone, but, if you just hold it, it's going to melt. And
sounds like a life lesson.
I try to eat as much ice cream as I can, but the thing is we're building communities together on an ongoing basis. People are going to join, people are going to leave, and we have to make the most of it together. Now, when you add new people in, we have several onboarding tactics, and there's a one-by-one chapter in the book, that second edition, that goes through a lot of different onboarding tactics. But one of the things we also need to remember is that it's not just about bringing someone in and having them learn everything about the company so that they can fit in. It's about learning about the person also. And, there are studies that are referenced in this book that were also referenced in the book Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, that talks about how you have greater employee retention when you encourage new hires to talk about themselves and share about themselves. So it's not just, you're indoctrinating them about the company. And the other thing that we need to pay attention is the people who are already there, and how can we coach and support them as we're dealing with this influx of people. Now, that time that 20 people arrived on one day, that was a deliberate shift in that company, at least, of we used to onboard kind of with a one-by-one pattern. Someone would join, we put them on a team. Someone would join, put them on a team. They had a mentor, they had a checklist, they leveled up in a rather decentralized way, which is a big load on the system after a while, because you have mentor fatigue and other things. And then you might realize, well, if I have 20 people starting one day, I don't want 20 people independently helping others get their dev environment set up. We want to do it in a batch, maybe with a few people, helping people get their environment set up together. So we want to do the things that we would need across any team that they would join. And then we have a next, so we have an organized onboarding in a batch kind of situation. So and our systems are changing greatly when even with as little as one change can feel like a lot, though. So it depends. Are people ready for that person? What is this person's role? I mean,
And did you also see the culture change when the 20 people joined, or not?
I think, I'm trying to remember back. I remember that day because we had the 20 people arrive. We were all in person. Someone got smoothies for everyone. We were together. We had this large circle. The culture, I would imagine, did change, but what remained the same? So a tactic is leaning on certain scaffolding items in this company in particular, we all rallied early on and did whitewater rafting as a team multiple times.
Oh,
and the
cool.
whitewater rafting oar, the thing that you're in the boat, you're kind of, together rowing ideally in the same direction. Those oars become a symbol in that company. That after that first rafting trip, everybody signed that oar. We put our names on it. Whenever this company had a significant milestone, this is Appfolio, they would sign an oar, and whoever was there would sign the oar. And so, the oar was like this symbol. Or this company would also have traditions. They had a guacamole making tradition they would do once a year.
I like the stories, by the way. They were fun.
Yeah, they would have these special things that they did every year after year after year. And so that was some sort of glue about company identity in a way. Maybe it meant more to people who were around at the initiation of the thing than others. But it's another company I was at, Procore, was really wonderful with their company values of ownership, openness, and optimism. These values were like principles in that company. And throughout the years that I was there for 4.5 years. Those values were really people would come aboard and we would actually use these values in a day-to-day and say things like, well, in the spirit of ownership, I'm going to run with that. So I think values, symbols, traditions are some of the things that can help us keep it together when we go through a lot of change, or just through the passage of time. How can we feel as we're part of the same sort of entity, but these entities are living and changing, and they won't always be the same. They're not always going to be, that day in 2008 where we were playing badminton in the open office next to ours at Appfolio, a second startup I was at. They didn't, the badminton moved outside years later, so that felt different. But maybe it's gone now. I don't know. But
and this constant change, I think you referred to it in the book as a panarchy, right? Is that where you have multiple systems that are linked together, but still they all change individually? Is that something?
Yeah, so it's kind of this idea that maybe you have changes at an individual level. Someone has the need to change teams, maybe for learning or sharing information. A team might grow bigger and split, so you could have a change at a team level.
Yeah.
Maybe you have a community of teams, a larger group of teams that restructure in a broader way. Or maybe you have changes at your company's level. You acquire another company.
Yeah.
Or you're a little lower than that. Your department switches up. Maybe you focus on product as opposed to focus on components, or you do something like that. There could be larger industry changes. I mean, even beyond that, right? With COVID introduced a bunch of changes into our work and team systems. Yep. Many that, weren't that pleasant with layoffs and other things. But so panarchy is this kind of notion that change is dynamic, happens at different levels. There's a wonderful book called Panarchy, Gunderson and Halling. They use this metaphor of an eco-cycle to explain disruption and starting fresh. So when teams go through changes, they might experience some kind of shakeup, whether they catalyze it or it happens from outside their team system. There are endings and then you start over. And these are some metaphors that I've written about in the book as another lens to try to interact with material.
Yeah, but that's
and do you experience? Sorry.
I was just going to say, it's
a bit of a lag.
Yeah, it's a bit of a lag here. But for one team, it's difficult enough, I guess. But if you try to then indeed project it on 6 or 7 different levels, you have to almost be a systems thinker or a really smart person to really see all the connections and really understand how one change might affect, several teams.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, and it really depends maybe on the company and where the company is in their life cycle.
Yeah.
But a lot of times changes are happening at these different levels at the same time. I mean, you could have your company is acquiring another company, but at the same time, you have a team that grew big and is splitting. And then this person, Maria over here, really doesn't want to work with this team anymore. And she talks with her manager and she negotiates a change to another team. So that's kind of like the individual level.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I noticed when I was kind of deepening my knowledge of the panarchy material, which I was exposed to by the wonderful people in the Liberating Structures community, by the way.
Okay.
One thing when I was noticing that, I was like, yeah, like this is like, we're not working in isolation in our teams. We are part of these systems and things are moving. And how aware are we of these things? Sometimes being aware of what's going on is a position of privilege. Like you're not exposed to things, or maybe you are. And then what's your responsibility there?
Yep.
So.
Well, it can be a privilege, or it can be exposure to too many things. It can be also can have a negative effect as well. So
could be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. This whole the whole space to me is it's troubling, right? It's challenging. It's very detailed, and I've been writing about this stuff to help me understand it better, frankly, as I go about my career and
I suppose
learn and grow and make the best decisions.
I suppose it's been somewhat also therapeutical and reflective for yourself, this process of writing a book, that book, because you had to really go deep into your own experiences.
I think it's like it was a learning. It's definitely been a journey of learning and discovery, especially interviewing. There's partially my experience, but interviewing a lot of people and understanding what they've gone through, and it was a process of discovery with these patterns, kind of a bottoms-up process.
So I'm sensing a tip coming here. If you really want to learn about a topic, start writing a book on it.
Yeah. Oh boy,
Yeah.
It's gonna be our next challenge, I guess.
Yeah, I think that would be something. One thing that I actually from the book that you write early on, you mentioned like one thing that kind of stuck with me and triggered me was having silos that are actually a good thing, and then you talk later in the book about the isolation patterns. Mm-hmm. My personal experience with that has been they always started as a good idea. The way you describe it, like all the use cases, or maybe there is a problem, maybe there is a new development. I cannot think in my own experience where that has actually worked out quite well, and I'm just wondering: is there a way to end that pattern? To at some point, okay, you time it. You say, okay, we do this for 3 months, then it stops, or what's been your experience on it?
Yeah, so I think it depends on your goals. So one of the first experience I had on it was the first startup I was at that was failing. The products that I was an interaction designer at the time, I believe. The products that we were working on, we were trying to build this marketplace for live tech support delivered through screen sharing. So this was pre-GoToMeeting, and people weren't buying our product. And it was very upsetting because, at least in the web development team, we had hopes and dreams for how this was going to go. Yeah. And we had a lot of people. And remember, this was the waterfall days that we were talking about earlier. We had a lot of people, and it was really a confusing time and upsetting time. And I remember to myself, like, what is going on here? We have to stop working on this. They're pausing this. Like, what does this actually mean? And then I was invited to join this small team off to the side, and we didn't have to work in the waterfall way anymore. We were able to work together. We paired. We just kind of made it up, and we were able to go in faster feedback loops. That was very liberating for us. And the cadence of the discovery that we were doing was a lot quicker than I need a pixel perfect mock-up showing the screen design that somebody else implements, and then we test it later. It was the cadence of the work was so much slower, but we were able to kind of fly together, and we were working on this, it was a small team. We were working with our founder. We were doing all this. I was there as a writer, and we wound up creating a product that we sold called Go to My PC, and it saved the company. And one of the most liberating parts of it was that our leaders told the other teams, leave them alone. They're not working in our regular process. And it really kind of liberated us from that. And then after a while, our team grew larger. Our division grew larger with Go to My PC. We had some more formal things got a bit slower and more kind of regular, but we had a transition to that. But we were able to create this thing that, really shifted and helped the company stay afloat. And then later
How did the rest of the organization perceive your team? Because you also mentioned an example of, I think it was Trade Me, the company from New Zealand, who actually split also in a similar way, and they were running teams, the project teams, and then you had the new teams that created kind of a rift. Didn't this create some sort of a rift in the company?
To be honest, like that whole time in the company, that whole period really felt like do or die. I mean, we were working together. We were focused. We got that product out. We were rallying around this. We'd have a bell that we would ring. And it was more about like, we got to get this we're in this survival mindset. Could it have been viewed as elitist or exclusive or, they are working on that team and we are not? Certainly, it could have been, and maybe it was. But the fact is, that we banded together and we made this product and we went forward. You have to. I believe that everybody's making the best decisions that they can at the time at hand for the people that are involved, and I trust that those leaders handled it well. So. Could have been a lot worse for us. But anyway, the isolation pattern like that, at another company later on, I experienced the same thing. It wasn't this sort of emergency situation like we were talking about with that one that was really a pivot to, like a lean startup pivot before the lean startup came out. But at the second company, we were starting a new product line, and it was another thing about cadence. We were doing discovery on this product. It felt like drag to be in a 2-week Scrum sprint. To catalyze and do this new work. So we split the team off, put the team off to the side. Please don't disrupt this team. It was a special team working on the new product. Everybody else was working on other things. And we were able to iterate. I wasn't part of this team, but they were able to iterate at a faster cadence. I think Kamran Satari writes about this. I quote him in the book about it.
Don't you think every team should work like that?
No, we need to take things on a case-by-case basis. That one started catalyzing and worked on something new like this. And this was a team that also wound up becoming multiple teams and kind of growing a division, and it was a new product. That actually broke off and became a company called My Case. What was it called? Not My Case.
We will link it in the description.
Secure Docs, the company that we catalyzed a product that later broke off and became a company called Secure Docs. It's in Santa Barbara, California. I think we want to get regular cycles with our teams. Should every team go off and do something isolated? I haven't seen that need arise, at least in my realm. It's an interesting question that no one has asked me before. I'll have to say that. But with any kind of if you have a short-lived team to solve an emergency, you always have to think about, well, what is the maintenance of this work? How do we keep it in the system? You have to, it's really kind of a bigger question.
I think that's an ownership issue, isn't it? If you have enough ownership of whatever you need to do, then why would you need the rest of the company?
Well, I think it could be a little more than ownership as well. It's kind of like, are we really working on something that's completely separate from everything else? Are we really in our own island forever? Probably not. We probably have to work out our contracts with the rest of the system.
Yeah.
But it's, these are good questions.
So the thing that Arno mentioned about ownership, and that also one kind of links to one of other thought that I had. If you use some of these patterns, like you also mentioned the ideas of reteaming every 6 months. Where remains the ownership for the deliverables of the team if the reteaming happens so rapidly? Where does that lie? How do people stay connected to that, or should they stay connected to it?
So you can talk to people that work in a case like that and hear what they have to say. Do you have collective code ownership where teams across a code base share ownership and have ways of working that enable them to make changes over here and over there? It could be that. Do you have more of a tight coupling between team and area of code? What are the kind of customs and norms there? I think it is a continuum of ownership. Having formal kind of role clarity is important with how the teams work together and who follows through on what, who owns what in terms of role is important. So I think you have to kind of step back and take a look at your system. And you also, reteaming doesn't solve every problem. I'm not advocating go change your teams every 6 months. It's kind of like, what problem are you trying to solve? And what are the possible options you might try in order to get at that challenge? Chris Smith from Redgate Software, I wrote about him at the back of my second edition. He's in a case where they reteam at a cadence and they do an open kind of self-selection activity. Could be an interesting person for your podcast if you haven't talked with him yet. But they have come and have this tradition at their company, and people get to give input onto where they might be. Some people that change at a regular cadence, another company written about in the book, Menlo Innovations, like when people usually change at a cadence, it's to share information together. And so I think the idea of ownership is a bit more global.
And would that be an example of the switching pattern?
You can feel quite limiting if your ownership is so tight.
Oh, sorry, it was a bit like
That'd
here.
be the switching pattern when somebody moves from this team to the next.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. It could be for sharing information or it could be for fulfillment purposes, I like to think.
Yeah, because
is there something that you might want to ask us? Because we've been like firing.
What's that?
Go ahead, Panche.
Oh, was there something that maybe you want to ask? Because I feel like we've been asking questions constantly to you, and it's like, is there something that maybe you want to ask us in the meantime?
Sure. So in the work that you do with your clients, how have you found is the best way to enter a system?
Oh. So I can start.
Well, we know what doesn't work, but go ahead.
Yeah. So what works best for me is to just ideally work with the whole team as a ensemble or mob programming. But if that's not part of the culture in the team, then pairing to me is the most effective way of entering the system and really becoming a part of it. Because there has, of course, as a consultant, sometimes you get hired for a company, and then you have to wait for like all your access and your maybe even your laptop and all this stuff, and that doesn't really work, because then the first month you're not really doing anything useful. So if it's possible to just start working with one of the other persons on the team as a pair or as a mob, that's for me the best way. I don't know if it's the same for Panche or Arno, but
well, for me, I generally don't do work with directly with development. So mostly, I would just try to observe and listen and see the dynamics of the teams that are happening, and then easily ask questions on things that I'm unsure of, and maybe sometimes even stupid questions, but that kind of eases up people more, makes them more open. So just purely be curious to learn about the organization, the people, get to know them personally, and that kind of, because I understand, especially if you're hired as an external consultant, to go and tackle a specific issue on a company, there's probably people within that organization, that setup, that might not be that much in favor of always of you being there. It could be something they've tackled themselves that hasn't worked out. So you need to be quite aware of that. And for me, it's important to maybe in the beginning to identify which people might be that, and kind of start building connections and relationship with that, and actually show them, hey, my job is here not to take over what you do, but actually, facilitate and be your right hand, basically. And it's not me that is going to do the change. You guys are going to do the change. I'm just helping you. Sometimes prioritize is the only thing that they need help with.
I think I actually made this mistake one time, because I was joining a company and they had an issue, partially technical, partially deadlines and contractual. And what I did, they had 3 teams, but they didn't communicate at all. So if they had an issue, it went to team A, which went to team B, which went to team C, and then preferably go back again, and then nobody solved anything. So I find it quite interesting, actually, from the outside. So what I did in the end was just, I'm not sure what pattern it is, I kind of forgot, but I merged them together, and some people were out, split them out and then make it one big team. And it helped quite a lot for that specific problem. But the guys who actually were off the team, let's call it like that, they kind of, put it nicely, didn't like me. So here comes the question as well, do you get a lot of resistance on this topic because people not necessarily want to change? Or I'm really bad at selling it. That could also be an issue. So I was just wondering how you experience it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, you have greater success when you include people in the changes and get their input into what the solutions might be. Because you could, depending on let's say you're trying to catalyze a deliberate change and you're not part of the team. If you don't involve the team in that, you could get a lot of resentment, and it could be sort of inappropriate for what they're dealing with. How do you know it's really the fit for purpose next change in that team if you don't consult the team, be with the team? I remember I was at one of the companies that I was at, they had a mindset that a team is this one exact prescription, for developers, a QA person, UX person, blah, 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 right? And there was one team that was quite bigger. They were delivering at a regular cadence. They felt like it was an enjoyable situation. They were building the right thing. It was going well for them. Someone from the outside was like, your team is too big. You need to split. You need to change. And it was I remember working and coaching the manager with that team that, okay, no, we need to push back on this, and here's why. And the team itself didn't want to change. It was like this foreign element coming and trying to do that. I think that's gonna be harder. It's almost like if you encourage teams to reflect on their structure and determine how they might want to shift, and noting that it is a possibility for you to change your team composition. I think just saying that, giving that permission across teams can be really powerful, because it's a lever of experimentation to try that they might have thought was off the table. So you encounter a challenge. Maybe there's 3 different ways to solve it. One of them is reteaming. One of them is organizing the code base differently. One of them, or both. One of them is let's facilitate our large meetings differently. There could be pros and cons to each approach. So we want to make a informed decision. So, but then let's say you're involved in a change and it involves 80 people. I was at one company, we visualized it on whiteboards. I wrote about this in the 2nd edition. We visualized a change on whiteboards, and a small group did it off to the side, and then we brought the engineers in to iterate on the board, and we were inspired by one of the stories from Christian Linwall, who was a person that is at Spotify at the time, in an infrastructure type role. There's a story in the book about how a group of teams of theirs, which they were referring to as tribes at the time, split into a few different pieces. They did the same kind of thing. So we copied that idea and tried it out, brought people in, and we learned that, this team that we put over here in this division should really go over here, and here's why, from the people that were involved in this. Yeah. and we visualized the open spots on the team where we were hiring, or we encouraged people, if you're looking for a change, these are some of the other opportunities. And so we tried our best with that particular initiative to say things 7 times as well. Patrick Lencioni, The Advantage.
Yes.
You got to say things at least 7 times. People just don't get the message. It's very hard to convey what's going on in large type changes, even some small ones.
Yep.
You got to do it multiple channels, multiple ways. We had an FAQ. You always make an FAQ with a reteaming. The second edition of the book has a chapter on planning reteamings. It talks about FAQs.
Okay.
Make an FAQ, make a visual, all this stuff, include people, have an open Q&A session.
Yeah.
Even after you do multiple things, you always have someone that's like, I'm not quite sure what's going on. What is this? And so you meet with them one-on-one, you help people along. It's tricky. It's problematic. Yeah. Sometimes you're lucky. It goes really well. Sometimes it's harder than you thought.
Yeah.
Trying to put the people first all the time is really the best approach. And just knowing that, these are complex systems, right? And it's really hard to get a signal across, especially when everything's moving and changing.
Yeah.
So we do the best that we can. It's like the Norm Kurth retrospective prime directive. Something like all the people. Do you know what that is? The words of the retrospective prime directive.
You have to help to remind me, I guess.
It's something in lines with all the people who were there made the best decisions that they could at the time.
Yeah, okay.
Everybody has, good intentions.
Yeah.
You mentioned this in your book as well.
It's a little more formal than what I just said. I feel tempted to Google it, but that will distract me. But anyway, we try to work with what we have, work together, make the best decisions that we can.
Yeah.
And did you guys actually reteam a lot from top down? Like management would say, okay, we're going to change the teams, or is it also a lot of bottom up approach? Like just invite everyone and see what they think?
I've seen both at nearly every place I've been at.
Yeah. And do you have a preference, or you think something works well and something doesn't?
I have a preference in my favorite type of reteaming is when a team gets together and decides, hey, in order to solve these challenges we have, or in order to pursue what we feel is a better way of working, this is how we would like to shift. And then they do that, and then they have another retrospective, and then they guide their change based on retrospectives. That's my favorite way.
Yep.
Because I find that the people closest to the work are trying things out themselves with an experimentation mindset. How about you?
It's also the mindset and the idea with the open spaces of Daniel Masak, with invite people that would create decision making, would create engagement, will create give results.
I actually like that story of Hunter Industries, where they do mob programming, where the people themselves could choose if they want to change teams or not. I think that's brilliant, because more than once I speak to people that are stuck in a team and they just leave because they cannot get out of the trap somehow, because the organization is set up like that. I think it's just sad. I really like that story, that you just can leave and change with somebody else if they want to change, and then tell management, okay, have fun.
Yeah, that blew my mind, actually. Yeah. Chris Lucian, head of development at Hunter Industries, talks about they do mob programming or ensemble programming. People are working together in groups.
Yep.
And at one point, and it was a learning from a retrospective, a cross-team retrospective, they learned that if somebody wants to switch to another team, they work it out with the other team. If they need help with that, they could talk with one of the senior members within their teams. And then later they inform the manager, who at the time, broad manager of the place was Chris. And that was just like, wow, you trust people to make these decisions. I think fear gets in the way of a lot of the things that we might do.
Why would you say that? What do you mean with fear?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the book Creating Great Teams by Sandy Momoli and David Mole. Have you read that by chance?
No, but we have a lot of references in this podcast, to be honest.
I like reading. So they talk about Sandy. They're a wonderful consultancy called Nomad 8 in New Zealand. And so Sandy Momoli and David Mole wrote this book about holding self-selection reteaming events.
Okay.
Right? Kind of like what I mentioned with Chris Smith. He is inspired by them as well. So they talk about having these, like, if you have 80 to 100 people and for whatever reason, you feel like you have this problem you're trying to solve, and it's going to result in changing the team compositions broadly. Okay. Talking very general, but sometimes people find themselves in that situation. Yep. Well, they experienced this at Trade Me as well, and they write about Trade Me in their book, but they talked about, well, what if instead of having kind of the management decides who goes on to all these teams, what if we open it up and facilitate this event where the people are able to indicate maybe first, second, third choices, and through some kind of facilitation, we do this open book sort of self-selection reteaming. In their book, Creating Great Teams, is a how-to book about that. And one of the last lines in the book, it says, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Because that was a big part of this. The management was like, gosh, what if they don't get it? What if nobody wants to be on this team? What about this? What about that? And I think what we find is that maybe when we open up these structures a bit more, the people can really solve these problems.
I try to do the same with my kids.
For leaders who haven't done that before, to take that step and allow that sort of openness takes courage. It takes, what's a small experiment you could try in order to go in that direction? Well, having a hackathon could be one, or like an event where it's a short-term event. People are in different teams. Yep. And you can try some of these open structures on a lower kind of, on a smaller scale, or less
critical.
What is the word I'm looking for? Not so high stakes, right? You can try it and then get a feel for that. And then later, if you want to do that with the people, you could be like, remember when we were doing that hack day and everybody did this and you picked your teams? Let's try that with our regular teams, right? And so any kind of change, depending on how close or how far you are from it, or whether you want it to happen or not, can trigger fear. It's part of the space.
One challenge.
So how can we create safety?
One challenge that all of us, I guess, come across when we go to work with clients is that we would be hired for maybe a specific type of work, and then you would see that there's like so much more going on in the company that needs to be done or could be done in a lot better. More focus on the people, and the idea, give more freedom, so not purely top down. And I have this, and I think the others as well, you can speak against for yourself, but this moral dilemma. It's like, it's just, if this was just done, just this slightly thing was done a bit, it's really niche. And then you can either, how far do you push it? And I've been multiple times in those situations, like, I'm just hired for this, just forget about that, just do this. And I have to say, sometimes it works out that after a while you build a relationship, you can actually spread out these ideas, but it's...
Yeah, I mean, for that question, a couple thoughts come to mind. So one is, you're the coach or the consultant, right? There's like the coach consultant person, the coach, the client, and the sponsor, right? So somebody's bringing you into this place. And there are certain goals that you may be aligned on. Maybe you have a statement of work and there's a scope and all of that kind of stuff. And then you're working with let's assume that the sponsor and the client are different, right? So then you're in the field, you're working with the client or clients, and you're getting to know the system and you're noticing different things, right? So, and then you start to care, right? Because you build these relationships, you care about helping this system grow and develop. And so, one tactic is working it out with the sponsor, if appropriate. Another thing is, like you said, working through influence, right? Change by influence, or one of you mentioned like change by attraction. Like, how do you put out the honey so that the bees come, right? So like putting out kind of offers and then seeing who kind of opts in, right? So you want to get formal with the sponsor about what it is and kind of work it through. But it's hard to do any of our things in isolation, right? Because we start noticing these things, and I think it's a sign of a great consultant and coach to see these other opportunities and bring them up and really focus on helping make things better. So sounds like a a good spot to be in.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes.
Depends what you can do on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either you frustrate yourself or you frustrate everybody else along the way.
Or you delight them. I would imagine that you're wildly successful at what you do.
Yeah. Well,
Sometimes.
thanks for the trust. No, but we also learn, like what Arno said. You just like learn from the things we go through, and so it's like and you adjust, and that's why it's like we have all kinds of experiences.
Exactly. I had one more
and
question.
You write your book.
Yeah. Maybe. I had a question about a team performance. We've talked about that a little bit a while back, where there was a big team that was performing pretty well. And then in the book, you mentioned that team performance can be tracked by metrics. And I think that's something that management also loves to have. But the thing that I liked a lot is that in the book, you mentioned the metrics from the Accelerate book, which, basically talking about how fast are you deploying stuff to production. And so not so much stuff on the team level itself, as in like how many story points are they burning, or how many hours are they writing up, or I don't know which weird metrics some companies use. So did you read the Accelerate book and then you thought like, oh man, this really clicks for me? Or was there another point where you said like, we need different type of metrics to measure team performance?
It always comes up.
Yeah.
It always comes up throughout the years. Like, how do you know if your team is successful?
Yeah.
And I've thought about this question for a very long time. I think the Accelerate book is wonderful, and it talks about different capabilities to build in your teams as well as those key metrics. You need to align with your leadership, with your business stakeholders on what it means to be successful.
Right.
So you want to be delivering the right things to your customers at a cadence that works for your company. And you want to be delivering things that are high quality. You want it to be an enjoyable experience where people are working at a sustainable pace. There's many different kind of angles to come at this question. And I think, aligning as across your teams on what the definition is and having the ability as a team to kind of self-assess is important. I love the work by Dan Vacanti, Actionable Agile Metrics. He wrote another book called When Will It Be Done? So essentially, the teams instrument their workflows and track their cycle time with elapsed time.
Yep.
If they can see and access these metrics and look at their cycle time stability, they could unlock the ability to do more use advanced forecasting techniques like Monte Carlo, probabilistic stuff. I found that I love these because teams can use these themselves and reflect with a data-driven approach to their workflow effectiveness. Now, if they're building the wrong thing, all of that doesn't matter. So it's not like this. There's no perfect solution to any of this, but it's more of what's the human side, what's the workflow side, are we working on the right thing, how's our communication with our stakeholders, are we hearing from the customers? So you got to make your definitions and align them in your company.
All right, nice. Yeah, this episode has become like one long Goodreads list, I think. A lot of books.
Yeah. I just saw grow a few titles. That's true.
Yeah, me too. So,
here's your list, it's right behind you. So.
Maybe we should add you on Goodreads.
I don't really use that, but go ahead. I will say I'm super excited to read this book, The Leader Lab. This is the new book I just got that I'm going to be starting.
Okay.
Nice.
Co-founders of Life Labs Learning, which is a great learning and development organization. So this is about management. So.
All right. So do you guys have any final questions for Heidi? Because I think we're running a bit low on time here.
Not get answered. Yeah, but we can do that some other time. I just want to say thank you for Heidi finding the time in her busy schedule to talk to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
Cool.
And hope to see you all soon.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So that leaves me to thank, of course, Heidi, and to thank the listener for checking us out again. We'll link Heidi's book, the second edition, so we have the right cover, because I think we had a blog post with the wrong book cover there. So we're gonna fix that right up. So you guys can check out the book. It's recommended. And so thanks again, Heidi. If you guys have any suggestions, questions, or remarks, you know where to find us on Twitter at 4Scouts. Heidi, do you have a Twitter or something where people can reach you if they have any questions?
Sure, it's at Heidi Helfand. You could also look at HeidiHelfand.com.
All right. Then we'll add that to the
Thanks so much.
to the episode description. All right. So thank you guys, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows, with your host, Rolf Surd. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit 4scouts.nl and on Twitter at 4Scouts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows.